While you guys are bringing some tables in for our panelists, I want to, because it's going to be Sina and Anas that are going to come up, and we're going to have a more general discussion now about how we can, what we can do to change the focus here. And Alex did exactly what I hoped he would do, because we've just got a new ball kicked onto the field that says, instead of focusing on biodiversity and telling everyone how wonderful biodiversity is, how about we focus on risk? And you've got tables for you as well, so you can put your elbows on the table and have water, and you can do all sorts of fancy things. Yeah. So that was a new angle that we haven't actually dealt with here. We have been a little bit in on the economy and the externalities and all that sort of stuff. But if you think of this as an ecosystem, then nothing can be external. So I think that's basically. So are we better off focusing on risk or okay? That was your risk. What do you? I mean, how do you think we? I'd like to get some ideas out here and get some discussion here about how can we get more pull? Pull being, that if the politicians pulling and us pushing, and we're all pushers in this room here, but the pushing hasn't been as successful as we would like it to be. Good ideas on how you can make it more successful. Alex says, focus on risk instead of telling things about how wonderful life is. Comments?
Shall I start? Yeah, I think risk is, of course, a valid argument. I think we've been talking about risks for a long time. What I think is we often, and I also hear you say that, people are afraid of change. And we have this fear of change or inability to change. And I think one thing which we haven't done good enough as biologists is to try to make a painting of what we will get if we make these changes. I think we could make a very beautiful picture or a very beautiful movie about where are we in 10 years if the Green Deal is carried out the way it was thought to be. Because I think many people will realize that this will actually add value to their everyday life and where they live. So I think we should be honest about the risks, but we should also try to paint a vision of beauty and how great this is going to be if we are going to succeed. Because I think many people are actually more motivated by moving a nice place instead of only risks. So it's
still a little bit more of the same, that we're changing our focus from look at how wonderful nature is today and why it needs to be saved, to turning it to what it's going to be. So it's a change in direction. I read it as a change in direction. Sina, and then Anna says, but I want to get this. I know it's late. Yeah, so I've been doing this all day. You guys can.
Yeah. So two sort of follow up. So one sort of related to what you're saying. I think it's extremely important to have this. That the vision that we all need to move towards something that is more beautiful, but that basically requires that we unlearn something we have learned. So, and I think it's important that we start accepting that and we start to take that journey, because we're doing a lot of things in our everyday life, which are, because it doesn't cost us anything, and because we're used to do it, it's a part of our culture, it's part of how we act together. We don't necessarily all need to travel. We do not necessarily need to eat the same, but it's a journey we need to take. So something we need to unlearn, which we have learned, to move in that direction towards this beautiful picture, because we need to accept that we need to give up something to get there. And I think the mechanism needs to be that it costs something to actually continue destroying nature, because otherwise you don't get the mechanisms that both pull and push.
Yeah, well, I was also in Denmark, the discussion we've been having about putting a tax on farmers. I was so sad it was turned into a discussion of getting the shovel under the farmers. It was really about trying to make the economic system reward the behavior we know need to have. And, I think we need to be thinking more in those lines. Anas? Well, microphone runners, I thought they just ran completely I thought it just happened. They're getting tired too. I can't imagine why.
Thanks. I want to go into that risk aspect. But I think it's very important that we also focus on the beauty of the nature and all the beautiful creatures and so on. But I also do agree about your what you said about the risk, and also that we might promote action by highlighting risk. And I do agree. But on the other hand, at the same time, I don't know whether we have this discussion in the rest of the Nordic countries, but at least we have it in Denmark. There are people, also biologists, and also people very much into conservation. That's saying when we focus on this risk to people, to mankind, we basically lie. Some of them actually say it's because all this biodiversity isn't important for. Actually, in reality, most of the species are not important. So highlighting this risk is actually lying to the politician. That is said. So you might have probably also met this argument. So I just want to hear, you, Alexander, but also the others in the panel, if you have any comments to that. But it's a discussion going on in Denmark.
I'd like to hear the other Nordic countries if they have that problem as well. Some biologists who are really conservation minded saying it's absolutely wrong to say that life is important for people. That other life is important for people.
I can start because
Yes, it's the panel first, and then I was just
Yes.
getting those guys ready.
I wrote a column about exactly this, like the value of ecosystem services, and I had a lot of different examples. For example, the ones with the vultures in India, where they died off. We used some medicine in the agriculture that they couldn't take, and they ate some of the cattle, and then boom, 50 million vultures died. So you had carrion lying everywhere and disease and everything in India. And you had between 2000 and 2005, you had 100,000 people dying every year because of this. I'm saying that, this is a pretty good case of an animal that, or a group of animals that if they die, it's going to be super expensive for us and we're going to die. And you just have it. The numbers are there. Everything's there. It's the same with some of the areas where you don't have pollination anymore. It's super expensive for us. And you have people dying now because they're lacking nutrition because the plants are not being pollinated. And you got it with the fisheries. We have, 800 million that depend on protein from the sea. And at the same time, we're overfishing the fish populations down. So these people are going to starve. And, I'm thinking that it's sort of a good case with some very concrete examples. But then I'm being met with some biologists who are saying, nope, nature's got no value and biodiversity doesn't have any value. And, it just doesn't matter if the species go extinct. I don't know, Anders. I'm thinking that we're sort of arguing on different levels here because I'm coming with some concrete examples and I'm being met with someone denying that and also sort of actually denying the consensus in science. And I didn't respond to this paper or this article they wrote back because I just didn't know what to say. It feels a little bit more like the discussion is based on something older, something that was there before I even came into this debate field, and I just don't want to tap into it. It feels like, with the respect for all of the old men in here, it feels like some old elephants with very big opinions, and also it feels like the link between biodiversity and climate that we see in the biosphere has completely been ignored. And they're thinking that species, it's just something over here, the climate, something over here. And I'm like, what about the composition of gases in the climate or in the atmosphere that's been made by these species? And so I'm not sure what to say about this discussion other than I'm super sad it's there because I think it's ruining something and they're taking away a very good argument to preserve biodiversity, to preserve, I don't know, their own opinion, if that makes sense.
Nina, you might be very well placed for this.
I can try, with the risk that it ends up being a little bit too complex of sort of trying to explain this. But I think sort of in the biodiversity convention, it's basically said that we have basically all agreed that we need to protect nature just for its intrinsic value. So all countries have agreed we need to preserve nature or the species just because. So that's the one box we are looking at. That's this intrinsic value. And some are arguing, let's stay with that. Because when you look at the curve of all species at the globe, most of them are, they're here. Most of them are rare. And if we lose one or two of these rare species, it might not matter for any of us. The problem is that we don't know what value some of these have. We do not necessarily know all their functions, and therefore it might become a problem. But so the argument they are trying to convey is to say, yeah, there is a lot of species on Earth. They have no value for us directly. But first argument is we do not know if they become important in the future in terms of medicine. We also do not necessarily understand their full function, the full relation to all processes. So simply just a lot of things we don't know. So is it worth taking the risk of losing them? And then there's the other sort of challenge of understanding it. It is that one of the connections between the value we put on nature is the relation between the ecosystem. So we have all the species that creates all the functions, and we have the robust, intact ecosystems, and they provide the service. Part of that service comes from simply just protecting and restoring nature, because then we get some services. And some of it comes from the species in there, but it's all connected. So your arguments are right. And the fear on the other side are that, okay, if we start now focusing on the values, but our arguments doesn't necessarily hold in Denmark, because which pollinators are super important in Denmark. How do you how can you estimate the value in Denmark? Very context specific. But then the counter argument is that, yeah, Denmark is not isolated, so we basically depend on everything that happens in the world.
Exactly.
So your argument chain holds, I would say, but we shouldn't forget that there is also like we just need to accept we have to preserve it all because nature has it right in itself. We can also look at the benefits and all the co-benefits, and it can become good arguments, but it's just not an argument against the intrinsic value.
But that's the thing, because the intrinsic value argument is good enough for us because, we're biologists and we love nature. But sometimes I was out having a talk recently for a bunch of farmers. And if I tell them something like, yeah, you should preserve nature because of its intrinsic value, they're like, I just want to shoot the wolf. Why can't I shoot the wolf? And I'm like, well, because of the intrinsic value. And they're like, they don't care. But if I then say something like, well, if you got a lot of wolves in an area, they're going to eat the carcasses of wild boar and they're going to prevent the spread of African swine fever. And this has been proven, so it's got an economic value to you as a farmer. If you farm pigs, for example, you're like, all right, that makes sense. That's the thing where we have to talk in that language, because some people, they care more about money than nature. And we need to address this, even though I'm like, yeah, it's not romantic, but it's just the way that we have to do it, I think.
You want to weigh in on this one, or?
Maybe I should just take the point of the intrinsic value then, because of course, I recognize ecosystem services, but I also just think it's very important not to forget that what people loves about nature, they are not seeing ecosystem services when they have nature experiences, when they want to give space for nature where they live or where they decide where to go on holiday. They don't see the ecosystem services or the money value. They see something that touches them. And I think that's very important just to remember that. I really recognize that rich ecosystem services, they absorb carbon and things like that. But I just want to, I myself, I like the intrinsic value a lot, because I think the way to persuade the politicians is not us saying you should do this, you should be grown up. It's to persuade the people that are voting for them that this is important to them. And maybe farmers don't like the wolf, but a lot of people like nature. And why should we preserve a forest edge butterfly? It doesn't mean a thing to us if we don't feel something about it. So I'm trying to take in the stand for the intrinsic value, but I recognize also the other values.
I've got Skuli, and I've got Hannah Kaiser, and I've got Ola. And anybody else?
Yeah, thanks a lot. I just want to sort of blend in a little bit into this discussion about values and society. And I think that we are really talking about like long-term, if we want long-term transformative change, we are talking about different worldviews. And to really introduce those, it would be to say that the worldview that we prefer is to say that we are part of nature. We are part of the ecosystem, the humans. But it's easy to say, but it involves long-term dialogue and convincing and education to really bring that change. I mean, I think we all agree on that, but that's what we want at the end to achieve. So that's why my comment was really mainly about the politics and how to get to the politics and how to get to the voters. And just tell you that we just had an election for parliament in Iceland, and environmental issues, believe it or not, were not really on the agenda. And we were all back there writing in papers and saying, please, please, please. And the simple explanation was short-sighted arguments related to economy, related to housing, and all those things. Of course, the election was called at a very short notice, so perhaps the big things didn't get attention too easy. And so the explanation maybe is that it's just too big for these people. So that's why I think that we do need this long-term transformative strategy, but we need to align it with a short-term strategy, like Alexander was talking about risks, about explaining to people that there are horrible things that can happen very soon. Just scare them a bit and then explain, but also underline that with a convincing statement about the ability of humans to deal with problems like you have been talking about, like COVID, like stopping smoking in restaurants. I've said this before here. And we are not stupid. We are not complete idiots. And when we cherish the values of being a part of nature, we are able to see those qualities that we have in the right light.
Yeah, so it's almost the same what Skuli was saying. So I think it's so important to understand that we are part of the nature. And when we are harming the nature, we are doing something bad ourselves. And if we're not hitting ourselves right now, but we are hitting the next generations. And it's horrible. And perhaps like a policymakers, business, and everyone need to understand that we cannot push ourselves somewhere else, outside of these ecosystems and outside of all the biodiversity that we see. And we have to somehow respect that. But how? So I was asking that how you see yourself, we have seen what kind of problems Denmark you have right now. So you have a lot of problems related to land use. So, and you are showing the maps how you see the solutions, how you plan to conserve your nature, but how you see yourself in sitting in that landscape. Is that your dream? Is that your dream nature, what you are seeing when you are looking at these maps? Is that something that you want? Or do you want more? And what you expect Finland to do? Are you seeing this this biodiversity crisis? Perhaps Finland is doing something bad. Perhaps we should change something that you have a good life here in Denmark.
I think that was pretty much aimed at you.
That's a very big question. Of course, I want more. I think the Green Deal is it's only part of the solution, what I was trying to say in my presentation. I think one good point from Sina was we have to unlearn things because we have fought against nature for all human life, and now we are actually in a state where we can afford to give something back. And I think this Green Deal is a bit of on that journey of giving things back. But I don't think we'll get the full beauty of nature on farmland that will be untouched forest for many hundred of years. But I think it's part of changing the mind of people, as you were saying, changing the mind of people that we have to give something back for nature because of its own rights. And we are part of that, and we are going to discover that when we have it. We don't have it now. We go to see it when we travel abroad. Many of us, we go to national parks, we go to Ecuador and beautiful places. We don't go there to find out how much people are earning from that or how much carbon is stored. We go there because it's beautiful, and we have to give that beauty back to our own countries. And I think in Finland, as I hear it, your forestry is really harming a lot these years. You're cutting down old growth forest for burning, and you're losing carbon storage, but you are losing the beauty of your country. And maybe the Finnish people will someday say, hey, was that okay? Do we want to live in these areas where we can't have these experiences? And I know we can take these examples of vultures dying, but we can also make a lot of examples of species dying without we ever noticing, because it didn't matter anything to us. So I think we have to stand on both legs. But I think the minute we have these big landscapes with untouched, pristine, or untouched dynamic nature, I think it will be much easier to show people you can have this where you live, and then the politicians, they will come after it. I don't know if that was an answer, but that was what was in my mind. Sorry.
Ola? And then if there's no one else, then I will round off. There is good, Nikolai.
Well, about the conversation about intrinsic and extrinsic values, that's like one of my favorite professional topics, not my favorite one, but one of the ones I have to, as part of my job, discuss. And I think, of course, we need to use different arguments to different people. We have to be sneaky there. But I do think we have a tendency to underestimate the power of the intrinsic argument. I think we think that politicians only care about re-election and only care about money, and the people only care about their next smartphone and all of that. And we're underestimating people there. If you as a biologist, you're specialized in a frog, and it's really, you love that frog because you find it fascinating. You know what? You can talk to a child. You can communicate that fascination to a child, and the child will get it. If a child can get it, why not trust that other people can get it too? Maybe that passion of the biologist can be contaminating, and let's spread it. I had a lot.
Nikolai? Yeah, it's coming. It's coming.
Or can I come a quick comment to that?
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Because I'm thinking that when we talk the intrinsic value and the sort of the ecosystem service value, I think it's sort of it's a bit like looking at a big piano, right? And you can play. I think we should play all the keys, not just play some of them. And some people tell me like, no, you can't play the ecosystem service keys. I'm like, fuck you, I'm gonna play that even more now, right? So we should just agree to play all of them instead of that other thing. And thinking of toads, and I can't help but sometimes stumble upon examples where we find value in nature where we didn't really realize it. For example, do you know the crucifix toad? Small toad, got a crucifix on the back. It's a very Christian animal. And when they mate, the male makes this liquid that glues him to the female, and it works underwater. So some people, some scientists, whatever, they figured, let's try to take this and see if we can use it on, what do you call that? You put on when you get a wound, like a little plaster. You know that? A Band-Aid, yes. They were like, let's see if we can use this for Band-Aids for people. So they take a little sample of that frog, maybe they're mating, and they disturb them a bit, take some of that little liquid, and they can use it for Band-Aids. So it helps us, and we never realized that. But if we just kill off the species, then it's just gone. All of the potential, all of the value, intrinsic, and all of it is just gone. Medicine value, everything. And I think it's super important to just play all the keys. Does that make sense?
That's a perfect, yeah, it certainly does. Sina?
Yeah, and I can't help I think it's really it's sort of when you say unlearn. I think one of the things we really have to unlearn is that we have to focus everything on understanding basically just valuing nature and spread all of our fascination. But how it is currently is that no one will give up their smartphone. And so it's not okay, now I look at nature, so I give up my smartphone. We want it all still. So there's still we need to unlearn wanting that as maybe not necessarily a smartphone, but we definitely need to start wanting a lot of things. And when we have to transform society, we need to accept that within our generation, it needs to be sustainable. We need to give over the same as we got, at least. But since we have destroyed so much, we need to give much more back. But that is just a fundamental basis for where, if we want to revert this, we need to stop destroying so much and think really different. But one of the things which often happen is that we sort of talk things as poles, as the intrinsic or the value, as you say, playing all the keys, or you look at nature, but then you will give up your smart. We need to go on this journey, but being sure that we also we need to give up something. We need to de-learn things.
Nikolai?
Yes, thank you. Yeah. Me and my buddy Frederick here, we did a project where we tried to find indicators for impacts in value chains for a company which design facilities for a large pharmaceutical company, and not to mention any names. And we did this whole project and made this tool so the company could assess where they impacted biodiversity in their value chain and tried to figure out what to look for. And they were quite impressed by the result and thought that it was quite operational compared to what they had already, because they had practically nothing. And we presented it to the company, and the sustainability department was very fond of it. And then I presented it to the corporate vice president of the sales and innovation, and she was like, "It's all good, really nice, but why is it that we should do it?" Coming a bit back to maybe on the personal side, she recognized the intrinsic value, but from business perspective, there still lacks this kind of why does it matter to us in our experience. And I was maybe wondering, you came up with some concrete examples, but also talking about external analyses with okay, maybe the most relevant for Denmark was the tequila example. But we have these big sectors, or at least the pharma sector and agriculture sector in Denmark. And do you have any examples for on sector level and dependency in Denmark that has this risk element to it, which we can take to Danish industries and Danish companies and say this is what you're dependent on, and this is the risk for you as a Danish company located in Denmark if you don't take any action?
Yeah, definitely. And let's just look at the agriculture then, because, in Denmark, we import just about 1.5 million tons of soy every year, mainly from Brazil and then a bit of it from Argentina too. And if the Amazon starts collapsing, there's this tipping point where if it sort of stops raining too much, well, then it's no longer a rainforest, right? And now, because the Amazon is so big, it's like, 6 million square kilometers, it can sort of produce enough humidity to produce its own precipitation. So precipitation in all of the northern part of South America, it's actually dependent on the Amazon. So if the Amazon rainforest collapses, you can't grow soy no more. So if we keep cutting down the rainforest to make soy for the Danish pigs, then at some point, if the Amazon collapses, we can't make soy for the Danish pigs. And then they're going to lack a lot of fodder. And then you're like, how are you going to make pigs then? They can't. So that's why I'm talking about these risk assessments, right? They are highly dependent on an ecosystem because it allows them to get food for the animals. That's just, I think you can make up, if you take it back a few chains, you could probably find it in most of the Danish firms that are dependent on these ecosystem services in some way. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, I think it does. Yeah.
I think we should. I think we should thank the team here. I want to don't leave just a second because I'm going to round this off in a minute. But I want to thank you all for participating in several sessions, and we'll have a little bit of nature also for you to take home here. And
Thank you.
you're welcome. And thank you.
That's all. Goodbye.
I'd like to thank you all for being here. I have to say, I've learned more than I had intended. I certainly, I actually have. I've enjoyed all of the last 2 days and everything that all of you brought to it. A little reflection on the last part here, unlearning. I like that business of unlearning. And I think one of the really important things we have to unlearn is the idea that we should worry about whether biodiversity is important for us. It's not. I'm sure evolution did not work with the intent of making things that were important for us. It's the wrong way of thinking about it. We're not over biodiversity. We're a part of it. And nature, I'm not allowed to call it that, but he left. Nature has had 3.5 billion years to make a fine-tuned machine where I have to assume every piece has a role to play. Maybe not under this climate condition, but another climate condition. But why would evolution produce something that didn't fit in the machine? And we keep standing here and saying, well, we're better than the machine. And if that part of the machine doesn't seem to be doing something for us, then we don't need to worry about it. One of my colleagues, one of Carson's colleagues as well, has recently gotten an enormous grant. What he's doing is, it turns out that in our eagerness to produce plants that grow to be the fastest and the biggest, we've taken away the genetic diversity. And those new plants aren't doing as well under the changing climate that we're doing. So what's he doing? He's going back with ancient DNA and finding the original diversity that nature put into these plants and trying to put it back in. If that isn't a lesson in humility, I don't know what is. And I think this idea of risk of going in and disturbing the fine-tuned machine is one that we can use in our communication. And I certainly believe we can. I mean, I don't want to get into a war with the people who only want it to be aesthetic value, but I think there's also an aesthetic value in the machine, and we don't think enough about the machine. So thank you all for coming. I hope you got something out of the 2 days here. And as I say, to my actually surprise, I thought I did too. So keep your eye on the framework, and we'll see if we get to continue through time. So thank you very much.